The Genesis account tells us that in the antediluvian world, when humanity began to increase in number, the sons of God, presumed to be angels in some interpretations, came down from the heavens and married the mortal women, whom they found to be irresistibly beautiful. Whilst Genesis alone is somewhat indefinite regarding what this actually means, extra-canonical texts such as the Book of Enoch tells us that these angels were called watchers, and that their descent from heaven to be with the mortal women was a grievous sin, and arguably one of the most heinous things that happened during those times. In almost all narratives pertaining to the watchers, or fallen angels who come down to corrupt mankind, a certain formula is normally followed. An angel known as Semyaza or Shemhazai is painted as the leader of this angelic cohort, and it is under his command that the watchers eventually fall from heaven and succumb to their desire for the mortal women. These angels don't just satiate their sexual urges, however. They proceed to corrupt mankind even further by teaching them the secrets of heaven, introducing them to sorcery, alchemy, and all sorts of forbidden knowledge. The worst of these lessons, though, is warfare and conflict, which is taught to them by the angel Azazel. The Book of Enoch tells us in chapter 8, "And Azazel taught men to make swords, and knives, and shields, and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth, and the art of working them, and bracelets, and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all colouring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and became corrupt in all their ways." Indeed, in spite of the many angels who were believed to descend upon the mortal women, and who then proceeded to further corrupt mankind by teaching them forbidden knowledge, it is Azazel's contributions that are met with the most prejudice, and it is Azazel who bears the brunt of these consequences. Some might argue that this was reasonable, seeing as where the likes of Barak Ajal, who taught men astrology, or Kokobel, who taught man the constellations, Azazel is the only one seen to teach mankind something as damaging and ruinous as warfare. What's more, the narrative leads us to believe that whilst man was never meant to know astrology or the constellations, these teachings did not jeopardize their harmony with God and the earth in the same way that Azazel's teachings did, which brought about the destruction of nature, the desolation of cities, and the sheer loss of life. It's because of this malfeasance that Azazel earns his own personal bounty hunter in the form of Archangel Raphael, who God sends specifically to apprehend him, bind him hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness. The only other angel amongst this wicked cohort who warrants such capture is the leader of the group, Semyaza, who is apprehended by the Archangel Michael and bound in a similar fashion. This then shows us the magnitude of Azazel's crime, that his arrest and punishment was tantamount, if not worse, than that of the ringleader. Indeed, while Semyaza's fate is similar to Azazel's, in that he and the other watchers are bound and cast into darkness forever, until the end times where they will be launched into the fiery abyss, this dark space appears to have first been created with Azazel in mind. Chapter 10 of the Book of Enoch tells us, "And again, the Lord said to Raphael, bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudale, and cast him therein, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever, and cover his face, that he may not see light." Read this way, the Dudale appears to have been created specifically for Azazel first, his own personal prison so deep underground that no human could ever be corrupted by him again. In some interpretations, such as in author Howard Schwartz's Tree of Souls, Azazel is described as being bound by chains and hung upside down in the darkness, which only further exemplifies his suffering in accordance with the significance of his crime. The Book of Enoch never touches upon the Dudeo again, and Azazel is never seen or heard of again in any meaningful capacity. The lid is essentially slammed shut on this wicked fallen angel, and original authors seem keen to leave him there and guide the reader away from him, much as Enoch is guided away by the angels onto other fantastical sights and fixtures. However, no matter what we see through the eyes of Enoch, whether it's the portals that showcase all the elements of the earth, or the cornerstones that separate the firmament from the earth, we are hard-pressed to forget about Azazel, who, if one was to take the text literally, would mean Azazel and his buddies are still there now, somewhere in the desert outside of Jerusalem, waiting for the end. Various Jewish writers must have felt the same way, for Schwartz, in his Compendium of Jewish Tales, explains that others found Azazel just as fascinating, and in fact, were compelled to seek him out, whether out of morbid curiosity or perhaps to learn even more from him. Now, why would someone do this? Well, if you were to look at this through a criminology lens, we've seen many people in the past actively write fan mail to convicted serial killers. New Zealand psychologist John Money presented this in 1986 as hybristophilia, or Bonnie and Clyde syndrome, a phenomenon categorized by heightened or even sexual interest in those who commit crimes. Considering that Azazel had at that point in time committed the ultimate crime known to man, it's no surprise that some amongst the ancients would have a flair of intrigue for the captive angel. One such person comes in the form of an unnamed sorcerer, who in the Tree of Souls had become so obsessed with Azazel that he even found a way to enter the Dudeo, which in this text is referred to as the Mountains of Darkness. Now, in fairness to this shadowy deviant, the text does also tell us that Azazel was not acquiescent to his punishment, nor particularly remorseful, but rather paced the confines of his cell, plotting his revenge. A way in which he attempted this was by infiltrating the dreams of this unnamed sorcerer, and providing him with precise details of how to reach him. Naturally, there are already a few problems with this version of events. The first issue is that obviously this Dudeo is not a particularly secure prison. If Azazel can still communicate with mankind by infiltrating their dreams, then obviously God's efforts to have the prison located in the subterranean recesses of the Israeli desert is kind of pointless. True, it may limit the amount of people that have access to Azazel, and might even dampen his ability to reach multitudes of people. But it's hardly Alcatraz if he can still reach out and influence people. Secondly, as Azazel is able to supply his newfound follower with all the details of his prison, and this follower is able to actually make his way down there, then the security of the site needs to be taken into question. If Azazel is bound hand and foot, and his face is covered so he cannot see, then how on earth is he able to guide anyone into reaching him? In any case, the text tells us that through the power of these dreams, he commands the sorcerer to attend him by first reaching these mountains of darkness. When the sorcerer arrives, he is met by a demon in the shape of a cat, who has the fiery head of a serpent and two tails. We aren't told what this creature was, or how it pertains to Azazel, but considering this entity is described to the sorcerer by Azazel, we can gather that it is certainly working for him. In fact, this creature actually leads the sorcerer to exactly where Azazel is chained, but only after the sorcerer is seen to take a bowl of ashes of a white cock and cast it at the demon. Again, the significance behind this isn't told to us, and the reader is left to assume that this is some kind of dark ritual that Azazel had instructed the sorcerer to conduct in his dreams. Perhaps a necessary step in bypassing the mortal limits of the Dudeo and allowing him access. The text then tells us that upon reaching Azazel, the sorcerer lit incense and stepped on the chain of Azazel 3 times. Then he closed his eyes, fell to his knees, and worshipped the fallen angel. That is when Azazel began to speak, revealing the darkest mysteries for 50 days. By then, there was none among the living with a greater mastery of evil. This is quite an insidious detail because the Book of Enoch and similar narratives lead us to believe that Azazel had exhausted his knowledge on mankind. God is even seen to tell the Watchers that whilst they had corrupted mankind with the secrets of the heavens, they themselves knew only worthless secrets, giving us the impression that the stores of knowledge in the heavens was so extensive that even these angels only knew a fraction of it. This detail of Azazel revealing even more dark mysteries for a total of 50 days makes it seem that Azazel knew even more than he let on, and now, with nothing to lose, proceeds to enlighten this sorcerer with the very secrets that God believed he had hidden. In doing this, you might also say that Azazel's final revenge is complete. He cannot commit the evil himself now that he was chained and bound in the Dudael, but he could establish a surrogate for which to employ his dark machinations and ideas. Indeed, the text affirms that there was none among the living with a greater mastery of evil than this sorcerer after his 50 days with Azazel, and we can only assume what sort of terrible magic was utilized on the earth in those days by this lone pariah. The text doesn't end there though. It's bad enough that even one person now possessed the dark knowledge of Azazel, but this sorcerer magnifies the sin by telling others of what he's learned, and reveals to other sorcerers the location and the means by which to visit Azazel in his prison. To this, we are told that Azazel received them eagerly, and also shared onto these sorcerers the same knowledge he had shared with the first. We are told, he in turn revealed the secret of where Azazel was hidden to other sorcerers, who sought out the fallen angel, and were tutored by him in the ways of evil. Thus did black arts make their way into the world. The last line here that concludes the tale becomes a way in which the ancient storytellers would rationalize the creation and use of black magic. A righteous and loving God would not have introduced such dark sorcery into the world. Therefore, it would have had to have been something that either man came up with on his own, or in order to explain its magical properties, was likely given to man by some wicked entity. Because of Azazel's notoriety in the Book of Enoch, who better than to blame for the emergence of black magic than he who all sin was ascribed to anyway? This might seem like a minor addition to one's understanding of the greater biblical narrative, and that might very well be the case considering that it is not scriptural, and thus most readers will likely dismiss it. But if it is read in conjunction with the Bible and adopted as one's personal interpretation, then suddenly Azazel's reach is far more potent than he's given credit for. Sorcery has quite the foothold in the Bible, and for the ancient writers compiling the text, it really appears to have been something they feared, and something they deemed it necessary to ward against. For example, in 2 Chronicles, King Manasseh is condemned for many of his evil practices, none the least being sorcery, and he burned his sons as an offering in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and used fortune-telling and omens and sorcery, and dealt with mediums and with necromancers. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. Sorcery was common in even earlier times and practiced openly amongst the ancient Egyptians, as told to us in Exodus. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Yet even this is met with a sense of scrutiny and futility, for we are told later in Isaiah, "The Egyptians will lose heart, and I will bring their plans to nothing. They will consult the idols and the spirits of the dead, the medium and the spiritists." Deuteronomy delivers the final nail in the coffin with its attitude towards sorcery, telling us, "Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead." Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. The idea of Azazel does more than just provide a reason why sorcery and black magic exist in the world. It also works in some beliefs to identify and perhaps personify the Azazel in Leviticus, of whom the scapegoat containing all the sins of the Israelites is sent to on the Day of Atonement. Leviticus 16 tells us, "And Aaron shall present the goat upon which the lot fell for Jehovah, and offer him for a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot fell for Azazel shall be set alive before Jehovah to make atonement for him, to send him away for Azazel into the wilderness." Some interpretations suggest that this Azazel was merely a place in the desert, perhaps the edge of a cliff, of which the goat carrying all the sins of Israel was led off and perished, taking the sins with it. According to Schwartz, some legends entail that the Azazel in Leviticus was actually a great mountain, and that below this mountain were unimaginable depths that no one had ever explored. In this place, there was an ancient unkindled power in which the goat was offered to in order to appease it. However, some do conflate this Azazel with an actual embodiment, perhaps this same Azazel seen here in the Enochian legend, that is still chained under the desert. To others, this Azazel is merely another name for Satan. 13th century Jewish scholar Nachmanides, in his commentary of Leviticus 16, tells us that the scapegoat is sent to the prince who rules over places of destruction. From this, Schwartz infers Nachmanides might also be referring to a demon or fallen angel in Azazel, who might certainly fit this bill of a prince who rules over places of destruction. With this imagery then, one might then be further tempted to conflate him with the likes of Satan. Therefore, it may also be deduced that the scapegoat in question was originally designed to bribe Satan, the accuser, this prosecutor of the Jewish people, to keep his distance on the Day of Atonement. The problem with this view, though, is that in offering Satan anything, it can be viewed as a form of idolatry. Nachmanides sought to clarify this inconsistency by suggesting that the goat was not offered by the Israeli people themselves, but rather offered by God as a reward for Satan for abiding by the pleas of his people, to celebrate the Day of Atonement without sin. While the main legend suggests that Azazel was the first to occupy the Judeo, some may even interpret that Azazel was the only occupant of the prison. Other legends propose that Azazel was actually bound along with Semyaza, and that the two were actually chained in their lair together. Schwartz points out that this contradicts another popular legend where Semyaza actually hangs himself after not being able to overcome the guilt of what he has done, or that he was hung by God between the heavens and the earth. What's more, in these accounts, Azazel remains unrepentant and takes on a role similar to that of the devil, where the myths of Satan, Lucifer, and Samael are all conflated into one single entity, a being who was once holy, now cast out and cursed to rule the subterranean underworld. The myth of Azazel might not be recognized amongst traditional biblical readers and scholars, but for those willing to be more flexible with their understanding, and acknowledge the Book of Enoch at least, it does allow for some answers to questions that aren't exactly tackled in the original source material. For instance, we get an explanation for why there was even a need for a flood in the first place, and while Genesis states it was brought about because of the wickedness on the earth and the corrupt behaviour of mankind, the Azazel narrative certainly makes the deluge much more urgent, and perhaps even necessary. Azazel also gives us the answer to why man is so geared towards warfare, why wars were waged in the first place, and exactly how weapons were produced. Through this interpretation, no longer is war and conflict an innate human tendency, but rather something that was given to us by a far more powerful being that took advantage of us. While some traditional readers will associate the creation of weapons with Tubal-Cain in Genesis, the world's first blacksmith, the Azazel narrative is far more direct, making it clear that this entity didn't only give us the idea of war, but enabled war by equipping us with the very tools to wage it. At last, the legends of Azazel also serve to explain a concept that is still very much unknown to us today: black magic. Given its supposed nature and the fearful attitude to which it's been approached with throughout history, one might argue that black magic doesn't need such a nefarious origin, and yet if it had to have a source, then you probably couldn't do any worse than Azazel himself. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to leave this video a like and subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.